All right, well, welcome back to Black Swan Outdoors, and today we're going to talk about your fallback plan. Specifically, we're going to talk about how one could initiate a fallback plan. So a fallback plan is basically any kind of emergency procedure that you have in place in case something bad happens. And so we kind of go into detail on this on our Patreon and certainly in our book, Tradecraft, which will be hopefully out within the next year or so. It got delayed by some other projects. So at any rate, we've talked about this in the past in several different posts, and this is just basically having plans in place in case something bad happens. And the fallback plan could look like a lot of different things. It could be having a cache of supplies at a location. It could be a buried cache even of money. There's a lot of different reasons why someone would want to have some kind of fallback plan. In today's video, we're going to talk about how do you kind of communicate that with somebody else, because sometimes in certain situations, you might not be able to initiate your fallback plan, or your fallback plan might include other people like family members, partners, friends, associates, that kind of thing. And in that case, you'd want to be able to communicate to that person kind of what the plan is, what's going on, and so on and so forth. And so this doesn't necessarily have to be a fallback plan. It could be a means of communication, emergency means of communications for other circumstances as well. So in the context of here today, we could talk about it in terms of like if you were, say, abducted by somebody, you could communicate your condition, your situation, maybe even something about the captor, anything of that kind of thing, without them actually knowing that you've communicated that, because you're going to be able to communicate through kind of clear channels, such as through a mobile phone or video or whatever. So essentially, this is basically kind of how do you kind of transmit coded speak. And so it's kind of a variation. You could think of it as there was a story in Vietnam where a Vietnam POW was caught and he was able to blink Morse code while he was reading a prepared document. So in that kind of, it's kind of in that kind of similar vein of how to speak in a way that others wouldn't notice that you're doing this. This video, in fact, actually dovetails very nicely into my POW cipher post, which is up on Patreon right now, because a lot of what is based upon this process is actually based upon the POW, World War II POW letter writing that went on throughout the British. Now, the Americans never actually had a formal code or code system put into place, but MI9 actually did create kind of a guidelines or kind of a rough idea of how to do their code. And so we talk about that in this post in coded letter traffic, so that you could write a letter, send it off to somebody, and that no one would know the wiser of what you're saying. So this is kind of very similar. There's a lot of similarities into how this process is set up as those letters. Okay, so all you really need is two things. You need a key and you need your plans. Now, we can continue the conversation that we've been having, or the videos that we've been having about notebooks and how notebooks play in. I had thought about actually setting up this video based off of a notebook just to keep that theme. Then I decided to go back with note cards just because it was easier to explain it for the video. So in a future video, I'll probably show you how to or talk about this in a different context with notebooks. But really, as anything, if you're carrying a notebook, if you're carrying note cards, a lot of the stuff kind of transfers over. It doesn't really matter. And so I think we talked about that in another video, the pros and cons of note cards versus your notepad. So you have this little package here that's put together, and then you're going to want to keep that hidden. Again, we're going to do a video on that in the future. So this could be hidden in a book cutout, which is literally just you cutting out a section in a book. We have a video on that. Or a safety deposit box. It could be could be a safe, whatever. Wherever you think would be secure, obviously, depending on the situation you're in, and the type of security that you want is going to dictate how you're going to hide these as well. Okay, so basically what it does, what we're going to do is before you start your trip or an operation or whatever, you're going to kind of think of all the different contingencies and the different plans. We talk about this quite a bit in a lot of our posts using PACE plan. PACE being an acronym that stands for Primary, Alternate, Contingency, and Emergency. This is something that's specifically important we talk about in our communication book, Guerrilla Communications, Guerrilla Radio. Of having a PACE plan for your communications. And you can take that idea and apply it to other types of emergency plans as well. In this context here, we're going to be thinking about all of our different situations, things that can be what we might want to communicate to the outside world or to our partner or whomever. So this could be, what are the escape routes that you're planning on taking? What are the rally points that you might meet that person at? What is the communications procedure that you're going to put into place? And maybe if there's safe houses or safe havens in the area that you might use. And so what you'll think about is the different contexts of which different situations which you'd use these things. So different rally points used in particular situations, different communications means in different situations, and so on. And so the idea here is that you have these note cards that are going to have all of the different scenarios put into place. So again, it's all about thinking forward. One of the things that I see a lot of times when people are teaching tradecraft type stuff is that they look at kind of the gimmicky things, the things that are very easily reproduced, but they're not actually thinking about the bigger picture. So not to go on to too much of a tangent on this, but a good example is sitting in a position in a restaurant where your back is against the wall or sitting towards the door. Okay, so that's perfectly fine. That's a good suggestion for people to do. But oftentimes what happens is the trainer or the people who are repeating this information actually don't know how this is important, and then they take that and they put it out of context. And I talk about this in our situational awareness post. So if anyone wants to really kind of get a deep dive into situational awareness, I mean really deep dive into it on understanding the physiological and psychological things that are going on with increasing your situational awareness, you definitely want to check out that post, because we talk about how bad teachings of situational awareness, like that example, doesn't really increase your situational awareness. You're just repeating someone else's behavior without understanding the context. And in this case, when we're thinking about emergency planning, we're thinking about context, and we're thinking about these different scenarios that might happen. So if you're just sitting sitting with your back, to the wall, the question is did you do the other things that might be necessary to prepare yourself for that contact meeting or whatever that situation is? So, did you go to that location in advance and do some surveillance to figure out, the entrances and exits, and kind of overall atmospherics of that environment, and getting cues and tips on how to fit in? Did you get to that meeting 10 minutes early? Did you find a parking space that was accessible by foot if you had to get out of by the alternate exit that you had already scoped out? So there's a tons of different things that kind of go on. Did you leave an hour or maybe even 4 hours early to do an SDR to making sure that you weren't followed? Again, all of these things that are happening in the background all gets simplified into a simple action. And sometimes that action then is just replicated, repeated across social media and YouTube and wherever without that kind of context. So I digress. Sorry, I was kind of rambling a little bit. But back to here. So we want to when we think about tradecraft, we want to be putting together plans and planning things in depth. It's not just simple off-the-cuff situations. Obviously, sometimes things like that happens where you have to make quick decisions. But oftentimes what we're talking about here when we're using tradecraft skills, or what we call tradecraft skills, or kind of a higher degree of security culture, implementing a higher degree of security culture, it means that you're putting together a lot of forethought in terms of what you're doing, in terms of planning. And that means you're thinking about what's the situation if things don't go right. And that is part of situational awareness. We talk about. So you have to think about the things that might not happen. Not everybody is flawless in their planning. Not every situation is controllable. And so you need to have these backup plans, these fallback plans. Okay, so you are in a situation where you want to communicate that. You have your different cards with your different scenarios put in place, or you have it in a notebook written out, each page indicating a different instruction or different situation. Now, when you communicate that, what you can do is you can use coded speak to do that. And so you use context, change the context of the situation very carefully in order to coincide with a specific code. Now, when we go into letter writing, it's a lot more complicated. This is a little bit more of a simpler version of what we're talking about. So what we're going to have is essentially two of these keys. And these keys are going to help us indicate the different plans that we have in place. Now, what we want to do is we want to have at least two keys. That way we can have multiple plans. So we could have one key for one particular plan, one key for a different plan. We could use a key as kind of a decoy key, something that, if you had 2 or 3 keys, it would be hard to know which keys coincide with the plans, and so on and so forth. So having multiple keys is important. Now, when I open up these keys, what it's going to look like is just a typical word search, and that's exactly what this is. This was just kind of a dummy that I made up on Excel very quickly. However, the idea here is that we're creating a word search so that we're finding the words that we're going to pepper into our communication. So whether that be an email or spoken word. So we'll try to figure out how to incorporate specific words, and those specific words are going to coincide with specific plans. Okay, so to make it a little bit easier to see, I did make this in the second key here. I did highlight some of the words so that you could see how this works. Now, again, this kind of comes back to World War II. The Germans were very, very analytical in thinking. They were very mathematical in thinking in terms of how they put together the ciphers. The British, on the other hand, particularly early on, they were not. They were more about pattern associations. Lots of British people at the time were using crossword puzzles and word searches for fun. That was a thing, I guess. So what they did was they took that concept and started applying it to the codes and ciphers that they were creating. And so this is an example of that. So in those letters, what they would do is the very first, you'd have a signpost, as it's called, to indicate to the reader whether this message was coded or not, because you wouldn't want to waste time trying to decode a message that's not decoded. So you'd create a signpost. The signpost on these letters, these POW letters, was the date and the arrangement of the date. So if you arrange the date in a specific way, then you could... If you arrange the date in a specific way, it would indicate or act as a signpost, letting people know that everything forward is going to be coded. So you want to keep these words or conversations in reference. And so in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to use a number system as our signpost. So if you're in a conversation with somebody, you want to indicate that, hey, I'm going to speak in code, then you're going to use a number system of some kind, and we'll use a date, for example. So I might work into my conversation August 8th, something happened, whatever, it doesn't matter. You could on August, don't forget to pick up the laundry on August 8th, or I don't know, whatever. So that now is kind of a signal to let people know. I'm going to go to my key, and I'm going to find 8 and 8. So August 8, 8 and 8, line that up. and then that's going to give me my first word, okay? Now, I'm going to say that this is going to be kind of clear language or clear text. And the reason why we're going to do that is so that it lets the person who's decoding the message know that they're on track. So this is very similar to how the POW letters were written. The very first word in the coded message was actually clear. It wasn't coded by any means. And so in this case here, it says extraction, F4. So what that means here is I'm going to go to my cards and I'm going to look for the extraction plan at F4. So again, there could be different types of extraction plans that are going to be coded with different types of letters, numbers. So it could be F8, G9, whatever it is. So in this case here, it's going to say my extraction will come after the mission is over. The plan will be to move across the border on foot, on a footpath at Grant Park, outside of Golden Hills, Vermont. Like, obviously this is just a made up situation, but this is kind of give you an idea of what's kind of going on, kind of giving a more of a narrative based off of this single word. So again, I'm going to try to work in the word extraction, or the date into that so that people know here's my extraction. Now, the other words that I'm going to be looking for here are going to be in and around this general area. Now, I could use the whole sheet for one specific code, or I could use maybe the sheet for two different types of scenarios as well. So it really kind of depends on how you want to set up your system. The POW letters that were written had some basic principles that were adhered to, and then after that, individual people had different specific things about their letters. The reason why you did that was that it helped kind of break up patterns on the whole. So if every POW officer that was writing letters to home, coded letters to home, was writing in the same way, if one letter was detected, then all the letters could be detected. Also, you're increasing your patterns. So by increasing the length of your message, you are increasing the opportunity for that message to be decoded or deciphered. And the same goes with this. If you're increasing the amount of words that you're using, the different types, then you're increasing the ability for someone to catch on. You're increasing through that frequency. So I'm going to search out for my other words. I'm going to try to remember the conversation that I had. So in this case, there was a reference to retaliation in my conversation. And I can find retaliation here, F2. There was a reference to money in the conversation that I might have had, and that's F1. And then here is mutual aid, so F8. So again, I can go to my cards, and then I can actually look up what needs to happen. So, so for example, here, Berlin rules, F1. Use extreme caution, observe Berlin rules, or Moscow rules, until my return. Okay, so then here we have F4 here, wait for signal. My signal will be a tone code left on your mobile phone. The level of secrecy is F8. Please keep my operation in absolute confidentiality. And so you could take this coded message from the crossword and you could kind of put together kind of an overall message, which would be wait for my extraction will come, wait for a signal, use absolute confidentiality, Moscow rules. And so, that would be the basic message from what we had from this code. So again, my extraction will come, wait for the signal, absolute confidentiality, use Moscow rules. Very, very simple. And it uses some kind of creativity, some pattern finding to kind of figure this out. Okay, so that's one way to do it. That's the word search version. I do have a crossword version that you could use as well, and that would look something like this. This is very, very simple. Obviously, you might want something a little bit bigger. And you could, again, this was made on an Excel sheet. You can very easily make crossword puzzles also on Excel. So what you want is at least 10 different words. You basically figure out the 10 different words that you want to use first, and then figure out your definitions, put your definitions in, write those down, and then assemble your crossword. Now, we're not going to be using the actual crossword here, the blank crossword, to figure out what we want. What we're going to use is actually the words in the crossword key. So there's almost always, with the crossword puzzle, a crossword key, and that crossword key is going to be the words that we're going to use. So we're going to go back and try to remember, those words that were used in the conversation to give us, to give us an indicator of what cards are on. Now, you'll notice there is no, F1, F2 signatory of what card you're going to have. So what you're going to do is at the top, you're going to put A, B, C, D, so forth, and 1, 2, 3, 4 in the grid pattern here, and then that's going to line up. So, so for example, pharmacy here is E3. I'm sorry, E2. So E2 would be the title of the card that has a particular plan. So I would just use the word pharmacy in the conversation. Could you please go to the pharmacy and pick up my prescription, right? And then that would let that person know, okay, I got to go to the E card to figure out, E2 card to figure out what's going on. Now in this example with the crossword puzzle, I used basically weekend errands as my things, because those are words that you could easily kind of work into conversation readily. That would be not detectable. There would be no reason why people would suspect you if you're talking about laundry or getting your hair cut, going to a barber, getting a car wash, having brunch, cooking, paying bills. Things like that are very kind of innocuous. Now, you could also make your, make a larger crossword puzzle and use other words. And so for fun, we could use spy words as a crossword puzzle. So we did that, and if anyone is interested in having or taking a look at these sheets, I can make them available on the Patreon. So just let me know in the comments below, and I'll put them up on the Patreon that you have. So this was basically just kind of the word search, kind of fallback plan. Like I said, I'm going to do some follow-up videos on this. So anyone is interested in this topic, we're going to do some more videos on the fallback plan in particular, and in this specifically as well. So hopefully you enjoyed the video. I apologize for the rambling a little bit. But if you're interested in this type of stuff, the tradecrafty kind of stuff, check out our Patreon. We're having more and more tradecraft related topics. As we said before, we'll have a book coming out of the different types of things that you can do if you like this type of stuff in the future. But for the time being, we'll be posting each of these topics on the Patreon. We also, just to let you know, in the very near future here, we're going to be posting more topics on the Patreon on medical related content, as well as some radio communications content, so kind of a variety of different lock picking, that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, check us out. Some of the content is free. Every Tuesday we do a Tradecraft Tuesday post, which is free, and then YouTube videos here. And then we do have some content that is not free, such as our situational awareness, how to be a gray man, and the history behind the gray man. So if you're interested in kind of the history of this type of stuff, we try to incorporate that in there. All right, with all that said, thank you again. Like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll see you on our Patreon.